I moved out of San Francisco, the urban environment, and you know, when I moved to California, I had 2 children 6 years later, and I didn't want to be away from my children, you know, schlepping into San Francisco and spending the day in the studio and have somebody else raise my children. So Larry built a wonderful outdoor platform. We have 6 acres of redwoods and oaks, and we're right on the side of Mount Tamalpais. It's just a beautiful environment. And I thought, why should I be leaving this beautiful environment to go to a dusty old boxed-in studio in San Francisco? So he built me this beautiful outdoor deck that just wandered in and around the trees, the redwood trees, and it was just suspended off the earth, and it allowed me to do my work there. And some people that had studied with me in San Francisco for the few years that I taught there came out to work with me there. And we began to do a lot of experimental work. And this attracted architects and musicians like Terry Riley and Lamont Young and Morton Subotnick. And then people like John Cage and Merce Cunningham would come and visit, and then they'd dance on the dance deck. So we began to attract, I don't know, that there's a group, La Mama, in New York, and the people that started La Mama were originally in San Francisco, and they started to come out. So we formed really a multidisciplinary workshop that was very much like the Bauhaus, which was a multidisciplinary approach to architecture and design. And the whole idea of the Bauhaus was to create art that was usable, you know, things that people used in their lives, that art was not to be a separate thing that was preciously stored away in museums, but that it actually lived in people's lives. So the Bauhaus idea just seemed to naturally take root on my dance deck, which is very famous now for all the wonderful artists who have performed there.
Can you say something about what it was like? I mean, if you think about dancing on a stage, it's contained, it's got the frame of the proscenium, and then all of a sudden you're out, sort of like we are right now, with among the trees, but your dance space is transformed.
Yeah,
so
well,
how did it change your movement?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because the idea of a proscenium arch, the idea that you danced in a box with a proscenium arch, seemed totally untrue. It just seemed that just isn't the way life is. And so we had no boundaries. There wasn't even a center, in the sense that you could say in this rectangle, you know, the center is here. The center moved. There was no this is center, because the space was like spaces in nature. So it totally changed my perception of dance in terms of context. I no longer considered the dancer an object to be looked at, but simply a moving element in a larger in a larger frame. That we were part of nature. We were simply part of nature, not an object to be looked at. And this was a philosophical change which affected me physically and spiritually. Spiritually, tremendously. I think that on a spiritual level, that was the first time that I ever thought of dance as a spiritual experience, to feel the interconnectedness between all beings and all of us being part of a larger force. This was inevitable, a philosophical presence that you could not help but become, you know, in tune with that. So my whole idea of dance began to be related to how nature operates. And I no longer wanted to be confined to the illusionistic aspect that the theater provided. So that immediately took me and my colleagues out into the streets, out into bus stops, nature, beaches, woods, any place was available as a place to dance. Now, once I took myself out of the confines of the traditional theater and took myself out into more lifelike situations, I also noticed that I took myself out into everyday life. And that was the next big shift.
So it's no longer that you're just working with other highly trained dancers and artists, that you're starting to interact more with audience members and untrained dancers.
Exactly. And I had been struggling for a vocabulary, a way to reinvent dance that was more connected to real life. And I began to work with what I called task-oriented movements. Now, I have two thoughts running in my mind at once, and sometimes I have trouble, getting my mind and my mouth to get together. So let me see, which track will I go on first? Because this was tremendously important. I had found, so I'll go back to movement, because movement is the source of dance for me. And I had found a way to break dance down in a science that also lent itself to creative responses by objectifying movement. But I found systems so that people wouldn't just be floundering on how they could do this, what I call direct movement approach. So I found a system where we could do movement that was on the floor, where you didn't have to deal with gravity, and you could work with just the skeletal system. And I found that if we approached the technique of movement from the point of view of the spine, and then saw the body, how it all connected to this one central element of our bodies, which is the spinal cord, and how the scalp, it rests on top of the spinal column up here, and down here the tailbone connects to the pelvis, and all those interconnections connected to the spine. So I was able to develop some kind of a methodology where you could develop some kind of tuning up of the body without forcing any kind of idiosyncratic style.
So unlike Graham, who's putting the contract release, you're finding something from the spine itself and how that
completely
works.
Different. And I always had the skeleton in the room, and I'd always say, well, now, do you understand how your femur bone connects to your pelvis? And do you understand that if your spine goes all the way down into the back of your pelvis here, that it ends down here, that anything you do in your spine is going to affect your pelvis? And and so I tried to make the image of how you were working with movement was an actual reality in your body. And I still do that today, and I'm still amazed that if I talk about a hyperextension or a flexion, people have absolutely no idea what they look like inside. I have some doctors in my class, and they pick up movement faster than people who've been dancing all their lives.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because they absolutely understand, and I'll talk in language. I'll say, let's do a hyperextension of the spine, outer rotation of the shoulder, and they immediately do it. And then the trained dancers will look at me and wait for me to demonstrate. And I'll say, I'm not going to demonstrate a thing, So, and then I found, well, that's part one. And then part two is what happens when you make the transition from the floor to standing. Well, then you have gravity to deal with. So how do you apply what you've learned on the floor to the principle of gravity? Now, gravity was very important for two reasons. It's to appreciate that you are not in control of your body, that gravity is, and that your job to be really efficient is to find a partnership with gravity so you can work with it and have that feeling that if you're going to, you see, when Doris talked about fall and recovery, you just imitated movements of falling and recovery. But what was important about that was that when your arm fell, what did it do to the rest of the body? And where would it take you if you brought your head down? It would create momentum, and then where did the momentum take you? I have people learning simple things like that, and all of a sudden I see their face light up because they didn't do anything. I said, no, you didn't do it, momentum did it. Oh, you know, it's like great discovery. It's one of my pet peeves that children don't learn about their bodies and movement, you know, all through school, and we grow up to be adults and we're motor idiots. And it's really sad. And I taught children for 25 years because I wanted my children to grow up learning about how their body works and movement. But that's only one part of it. The second part of it is that once you become you form a partnership with your body, and you understand the principles that are working with your body. So then we move, then the second part is moving through space. Well, then you have inertia, and then you have all these other forces that are working on your body, and eventually you develop an intelligent vocabulary. Now, what do you do with that? That's fine. Now we have a name for that now, which is called somatic learning. But in those days, there was no such thing as somatic learning. But now we have. But then what transforms that into art or into, say, dance? And so what was important to me about that was that then you can begin your own self-determination in how you use that movement. So if you drop your head and you feel that now I've got flexion in my upper spine, but what's the feeling behind that movement? Where's feeling come in?
So even though you're starting from a very scientific and objective place about how the body is put together, that's where you're getting at the
That's what
expression.
I'm getting at, is the expression. So if you do a movement and you just drop your head, that's one thing. Then if you let it go through your spine, that's so different than the feeling if I go into a hyperextension and I let my head go back. Oh, you know, I always do this. You can do it with me because it's kind of fun. And just do this movement and just say, oh, I feel so depressed. I mean, really do it. Lift your sternum up and say, oh, I feel so depressed. Or you take this movement, I feel so happy. I'm just the happiest person. See that? So then you begin to connect movement with feeling, or you know, going from feeling is just a quality, but then you can also go deeper and say, oh, I'm feeling sad. I feel sad because. And you ask the word because, and then you get into associations, and you get into imagery, and you get into the full spectrum of the awareness of movement on a physical level, on an emotional level, on an imaginative level. So then you find some content. So then your dance begins to relate to who you are. Not who I am. What do you care about who I am? You need to care about who you are. And when you find the you in you and it's deep enough, then you find your humanity. Then you find your spiritual connection. That's the art process in dance. And I found that until I got rid of all that stylistic armor, I couldn't get at that.